Chapter 3. Melissa. After confirming his plan, Zhou Mingrui immediately felt he had a mental crutch. His fear and unease were all swept away into a corner of his mind. Only then did he have the mood to carefully study Klein's memory fragments. Zhou Mingrui habitually stood up before turning off the Peep's valve. He watched the wall lamp gradually dim until its flame extinguished before sitting back down. As he subconsciously fiddled with the revolver's brass cylinder, he pressed the side of his head. He slowly recalled his memories in the crimson-dyed darkness, as though he was the most attentive viewer in a movie theater. Perhaps as a result of having a bullet pass through his head, Klein's memories were like shattered glass. Not only were the memories not contiguous, there were many spots which were clearly missing. For example, memories pertaining to how the exquisite revolver appeared in his possession, whether he had committed suicide or was killed, as well as the meaning of the words "everyone will die," including me on the notebook, or whether he had participated in anything odd 2 days before the incident. Not only had these particular memories become fragmented, there were also missing pieces. It was the same even for knowledge he ought to know. In light of the present situation, Zhou Mingrui believed that if Klein were to return to university, it was unlikely he could graduate. This was despite him having left campus just days ago without relaxing one bit. Through the window, Zhou Mingrui silently observed the red moon setting in the west. The gradual sinking of the moon continued until faint light glowed from the east, dyeing the horizon golden. At that moment, there was a commotion inside the apartment. Soon a sound of footsteps approached his door. "Melissa is awake. She's really as punctual as always." Zhou Mingrui smiled. Due to Klein's memories, seeing Melissa made him feel as though she was really his younger sister. He immediately contradicted himself. Melissa was different from Benson and Klein. Her rudimentary education was not completed at the Sunday school classes offered by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. When she reached schooling age, the Lone Kingdom had enacted the Basic Education Law. A primary and secondary education committee was established and was specially provided with funding, increasing the kingdom's investment into education. In less than 3 years, under the premise that numerous church schools would be incorporated, many public primary schools were established to strictly maintain the principle of religious neutrality. This was to prevent education from involving itself in the conflicts between the Lord of Storms, Evernight Goddess, and the God of Steam and Machinery. Compared to Sunday school that only cost a copper penny a week, a public primary school's cost of 3 pence a week appeared rather expensive. However, the former only provided education every Sunday, whereas the latter provided 6 days of classes a week. In conclusion, the price was so low that it was almost free. Melissa was different from most girls. From a young age, she enjoyed things like gears, springs, and bearings. Her ambition was to be a steam mechanic. Having suffered from a lack of culture, Benson, who knew the importance of education, supported his sister's dreams just like how he supported Klein's university education. After all, Tianjin Technical School was only considered secondary education. There was no need for her to attend language school or a public school for more knowledge. In July last year, 15-year-old Melissa passed her entrance examinations and fulfilled her dreams of becoming a student at the Tianjin Technical School's STEAM and Machinery department. As such, her weekly school fees raised to 9 pence. Meanwhile, Benson's company was affected by the situation in the southern continent. There was a drastic drop, both in profit and business transactions. More than a third of the employees were retrenched. In order to keep his job and maintain their livelihood, Benson could only accept more arduous tasks. He had to work overtime more frequently or head to places with harsh environments. That was what he was occupied with the past few days. It was not that Klein did not think of helping share his elder brother's burden, but being born a commoner and having been admitted into an average language school, he felt a strong sense of inadequacy when he enrolled into university. For example, as the origin of all languages in the northern continent, the ancient language of Phizak was something all the children of nobles and of the wealthy class would learn from a young age. In contrast, he only made first contact with it in university. He faced many similar aspects during his schooling career. Klein nearly gave his all and often stayed up late into the night, and woke up early before barely managing to catch up to the others, eventually allowing him to graduate with average results. Memories regarding his elder brother and younger sister remained active in Zhou Mingrui's mind until he turned the doorknob open. Only then did he jolt awake and remember that he held a revolver in his hand. With Melissa arriving at any moment, Zhou Mingrui pressed onto his temple and hurriedly pulled open a desk drawer and threw the revolver in before slamming it close. What happened? Melissa looked over curiously when she heard the commotion. She was still in the prime of her youth. Even though she did not have much nutritious food to eat, making her face thin and slightly pale, her skin remained lustrous as it exuded the vibes of a young girl. When Zhou Mingrui saw his sister's brown eyes look over, he forcibly composed himself and picked up an item beside his hand before calmly closing the drawer to conceal the existence of the revolver. He placed his other hand on his temple, the texture confirming that his wound had already healed. He took out a silver vine leaf pocket watch and pressed the top gently, causing its cover to flip open. It was a picture of the siblings' father. It was the most valuable item the Royal Army sergeant left behind, but being a second-hand item, it would often malfunction from time to time in recent years, even though he had gotten a watchsmith to fix it. It had embarrassed Benson, who enjoyed bringing it with him to elevate his status many a time, so it was thrown away back at home in the end. It had to be said that perhaps Melissa did have talent in machinery. After grasping the principles behind the watch, she borrowed the tools from her technical school to fiddle with the pocket watch. Recently, she even claimed to have fixed it. Zhou Mingrui looked at the watch's open cover and saw that the second hand was not moving. Subconsciously, he twisted the top dial to wind the pocket watch. However, despite winding it a few times, he did not hear the sound of taut springs. The second hand remained motionless. It looks like it's broken again. He looked at his sister while trying to find a topic of conversation. Melissa shot him an expressionless glance and briskly walked over to take the pocket watch away. She stood in her spot and pulled up the button sitting atop the pocket watch. With a few simple turns, the tick-tocking of the second hand sounded. Zhou Mingrui's expression immediately turned blank. At that moment, a bell chimed from a faraway cathedral. It chimed 6 times, sounding distant and ethereal. Melissa tilted her head to listen to it and pulled the button up once again. Following that, she turned it to synchronize the time. "It's okay now," she said simply without emotion. She then pressed the top button back and handed the pocket watch back to Zhou Mingrui. Zhou Mingrui returned a smile politely in embarrassment. Melissa gave her elder brother a piercing stare before turning to walk to the cupboard. She took her toiletries and towel before opening the door to leave. She headed for the public bathroom. Zhou Mingrui lowered his head and chuckled. He closed the pocket watch's cover with a click before opening it again. He repeated this action as his idle thoughts focused on a question. The pocket watch opened. The pocket watch closed. Melissa returned from washing up and saw her brother's subconscious act of constantly opening and closing the pocket watch. Her gaze was once again glazed with exasperation as she said with a sweet voice, "Klein, take out all the remaining bread. Remember to buy fresh ones today. There's meat and peas too. Your interview is soon. I'll make you mutton stewed with peas." As she spoke, she moved a stove out from a corner. With some charcoal, she boiled a pot of hot water. Before the water boiled, she opened the cupboard's lowest drawer and took out what seemed like a treasure, a can of inferior tea leaves. She threw about 10 leaves into the pot and pretended that it was real tea. Melissa poured 2 big cups of tea as she shared 2 pieces of rye bread with Zhou Mingrui over tea. Zhou Mingrui still felt weak and was starving. He forced himself to swallow the bread with the tea while complaining inwardly. Melissa finished eating a few minutes later. After she adjusted her black hair that reached down to her vest, she looked at Zhou Mingrui and said, "Remember to buy fresh bread. All we need is 8 pounds. The weather is hot, so the bread will easily spoil. Also, buy the mutton and peas. Remember to buy them." Zhou Mingrui nodded with a smile. "All right." Regarding the Lone Kingdom's pound, Zhou Mingrui matched Klein's muscle memory with his. He believed it was close to 1/2 kilogram of what he was accustomed to. Melissa did not say anything further. She stood up and tidied the area. After packing away the last bit of bread for lunch, she put on a tattered veil cap that their mother left behind, picked up a self-sewn bag used to carry her books and stationery, and prepared to leave. It was not Sunday, so she had an entire day of classes to attend. Walking from their apartment to Tianjin Technical School took about 50 minutes. There were public horse carriages that cost a penny a kilometer with a limit of 4 pence in the city and 6 pence in the city outskirts. In order to save money, Melissa would leave ahead of time and walk to school. Moments after she opened the main door, She paused in her footsteps and turned her body halfway, saying, "Klein, don't buy too much mutton or peas. Benson might come back on Sunday. Oh, and remember we only need 8 pounds of bread." "All right, sure thing," answered Zhao Mingrui exasperatedly. Simultaneously he repeated the word Sunday a few times in his head. In the northern continent, a year was similarly split into 12 months. Every year there was 365 or 366 days. A week was similarly split into 7 days. The splitting of months was a result of astronomical observations. It made Zhao Mingrui suspect whether he was in a parallel world. As for the splitting of days, it was a result of religion. This was because northern continent had 7 orthodox gods: the eternal blazing sun, the lord of storms, the god of knowledge and wisdom, the ever-night goddess, Mother Earth, the god of war, and the god of steam and machinery. Watching his sister close the door and leave, Zhao Mingrui suddenly sighed. Soon his thoughts focused onto the luck enhancement ritual. Chapter 4. Divination. Returning to his chair again, he heard the faraway cathedral's bells chime again. It continued 7 times before Zhao Mingrui slowly stood up. He went up front to the cupboard and took out his clothes. A black vest with a matching suit, trousers that clung tightly to his legs, a halved top hat, and his faint scholarly air made Zhao Mingrui feel like he was watching an English drama set in the Victorian era. He suddenly muttered softly as he shook his head with a wry smile. "I'm not going for an interview. All I'm doing is buying some ingredients to prepare for my luck enhancement ritual." Klein was so concerned about his impending interview that it became instinct. When he was not focused enough, he habitually wore his only decent set of clothing. After taking a breath, Zhao Mingrui took off his suit and vest, switching to a brownish-yellow coat. He also changed to a felt hat with a rounded edge of the same color. With his outfit done, he walked to the side of the bed and lifted a square cushion. He reached his hand into an inconspicuous hole beneath and rummaged around before finding an intermediate layer. When he retracted his right hand, there was a roll of notes in his palm. They were about 8 notes with faded dark green colors. These were all the savings Benson had at the moment. It even included the living expenses for the next 3 days. 2 of them were 5 solly notes and the remaining were 1 solly notes. In the Lone Kingdom's currency system, solly was ranked second. It originated from ancient silver coins. 1 solly was equivalent to 12 copper pence. They had denominations of 1 and 5 solly. At the top of the currency system was the gold pound. They were also paper-based but were guaranteed by gold and pegged directly. A gold pound was equivalent to 20 solly. They had denominations of 1, 5, and 10 gold pounds. Zhao Mingrui spread a note and caught a whiff of the faint, unique ink. This was the smell of money. Perhaps a result of Klein's memory fragments or his constant desire for money, Zhao Mingrui felt like he had instantly fallen in love with these notes. Zhao Mingrui admired it for nearly a minute before pulling out 2 1 solly notes. He then rolled up the remaining notes and stuffed them back into the cushion's concealed layer. After arranging and flattening the cloth around the hole, Zhao Mingrui folded the 2 notes he had taken out neatly and placed them into the left pocket of his brownish-yellow jacket. He separated the notes from the few pence he had in his trouser pocket. With all of this done, he placed a key into his right pocket and brought a dark brownish paper bag along with him and quickly walked toward the door. His shuffling footsteps slowed down from a brisk pace until it eventually stopped. Zhao Mingrui stood by the door and was unsure when he had already begun to frown. After some deep thought, Zhao Mingrui returned to his desk and pulled open the drawer. He then took out the shimmering brass revolver. This was the only defensive weapon he could think of, and it was the only weapon with sufficient power. Although he had never practiced shooting, just pulling such a revolver out would definitely daunt anyone. He caressed the revolver's cold metal before stuffing his revolver into the pocket where his notes were. He clasped the money in his palm as his fingers pressed onto the gun's handle. It was perfectly concealed. Feeling secure, he who knew a little of everything suddenly had a worry. Being deluged with such a thought, Zhao Mingrui quickly thought of a solution. He drew the revolver and released the cylinder. He then aligned the empty chamber, which was a result of the suicide, along the gun's hammer, before closing it. This way, even if there was a misfire, he would discharge an empty round. And golly. After stuffing his revolver back into his pocket, Zhou Mingrui kept his left hand in there. He pressed down on his hat with his right hand and pulled open the door before leaving. The corridor during the day remained dim as limited sunlight shone in from the windows situated at the end of the corridor. Zhou Mingrui quickly went down the stairs and left the apartment before taking in the brilliance and warmth of the sun. Although it was almost July, it was still considered the middle of summer. However, Tianjin was situated north of the Lone Kingdom, so it had unique climate characteristics. The highest annual temperature was not even 30 degrees C on Earth, with even cooler mornings. However, the streets were awash with filthy water and strewn junk. From Klein's memories, this was not a rare sight in low-income communities, even if there were sewers. After all, there were just too many people, and people needed to survive. Come and try our delicious roasted fish. Hot and fresh oyster soup. Drink a bowl in the morning and feel invigorated all day. Fresh fish from the port for just 5 pence apiece. Muffins and eel soup make the perfect combination. Conch, conch, conch. Vegetables freshly plucked from the farms outside the city. Cheap and fresh. Eee. The mobile hawkers who sold vegetables, fruits, and hot food shouted along the streets as they beckoned the rushing pedestrians. Some of them would stop and carefully compare before purchasing. Others would impatiently wave their hands as they had yet to find work for the day. Zhou Mingrui took in a whiff of the air that mixed both noxious and fragrant aromas. As he clenched the revolver tightly in his left hand, he held the notes tight. He pressed down on his hat with his right hand while passing through the busy street, slouching a little. There was bound to be thieves in populated areas. Furthermore, this street had no lack of poor citizens who were working part-time after losing their previous jobs. There were also starving children that were exploited by adults to do their bidding. He proceeded forward until he reached a point where the crowdedness around him restored to normal. He straightened his back and raised his head to look down the street. There was a vagrant accordionist busking. The melody was sometimes pleasant, sometimes fervent. Beside him were several children in ragged clothes with sallow complexions due to malnutrition. They listened to the music and moved to the beat, dancing self-made choreographies. Their faces were filled with joy as though they were a prince or an angel. A deadpan woman passed by. Her skirt was dirty and her skin was dull. Her gaze appeared dull and sluggish. Only when she looked at the bunch of children did a faint glow flash. It was as though she had seen herself from 3 decades ago. Zhou Mingrui overtook her and turned into another street before stopping at Smyron Bakery. The owner of the bakery was a 70-plus-year-old granny named Wendy Smyron. Her hair was completely grayish-white, and she always wore a genial smile. From the beginning of Klein's memories, she had been here selling bread and pastries. Zhou Mingrui gulped a mouthful of saliva and smiled. Mrs. Smyron, 8 pounds of rye bread. Oh, dear Klein, where's Benson? Is he not back? Wendy asked smilingly. In a few more days, answered Zhou Mingrui vaguely. As Wendy took the rye bread, she sighed. He sure is a hard-working lad. He will have a good wife. Upon saying this, the corners of her lips curled up as she said playfully, all is good now. You have already graduated. You are a history graduate of our Koi University. Oh, you will soon be able to earn money. You should not be staying in the apartment you are currently living in. At the very least, you should have a bathroom you can call your own. Mrs. Smyron, you seem to be a young and energetic woman today. All Zhou Mingrui could do was respond with a dry smile. If Klein were to successfully pass his interview and become a lecturer at Tianjin University, it was true that his family would immediately be pushed up to a higher socioeconomic status. In his memory fragment, he had once fantasized about renting a bungalow in the suburbs. There would be 5 or 6 rooms, 2 bathrooms, a huge balcony upstairs, 2 rooms, a dining room, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and an underground storage room on the first floor. This was not a wishful dream. Even a lecturer on probation at Tianjin University would have a weekly salary of 2 gold pounds. After the probationary period, the salary would be raised to 3 gold pounds and 10 solly. One had to know that despite working for so many years, Klein's brother, Benson, only had a weekly salary of 1 pound and 10 solly. Ordinary workers at a factory did not even get a pound, or at best a little more. And rent for a bungalow was about 19 solly to 1 pound and 18 solly. This is the difference between earning 3 to 4,000 yuan and earning 14 to 15,000 yuan a month. Zhou Mingrui mumbled to himself. However, all of this was under the premise that he passed either the Tianjin University or Backlund University interviews. There were not many other opportunities. People without any connections were unable to get recommendations to become a public servant, and those who studied history were more limited in job opportunities. There was not much demand for private consultants from the aristocrats, banks, or industrial magnates. Taking into account that the knowledge Klein grasped were fragmented and incomplete, Zhou Mingrui felt awkward and guilty towards Mrs. Smirin's expectations of him. "No, I have always been this young," answered Wendy humorously. As she spoke, she packed the 16 rye bread she had weighed into the brown paper bag that Zhou Mingrui had brought. She stretched out her right hand and said, 9 pence. Every rye bread weighted about half a pound as differences were inevitable. 9 pence? Wasn't it 11 pence 2 days ago? Zhou Mingrui asked subconsciously. "You have to thank the people who protested on the streets for the repeal of the Grain Act," said Wendy as she shrugged. Zhou Mingrui nodded in vague acknowledgement. Klein's memories regarding this was incomplete. All he remembered was that the core tenet of the Grain Act was to protect the prices of domestic agriculture products. Once the prices rose to a certain level, grain imports from southern nations like Feine-Potter, Mason, Lemberg were stopped. Without saying much, Zhou Mingrui, afraid he would end up pulling out the revolver, carefully took out his notes and handed one of them over to Mrs. Smirin. He was given 3 copper pence in change. Stuffing them into his trouser pocket, he took the paper bag containing the bread and headed for the lettuce and meat market across the street. He was working hard for the mutton stewed with peas his sister had exhorted. There was a municipal square at the intersection of Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street. Many tents were erected there, and clowns dressed in odd and funny attires were distributing flyers. "There's a circus performance tomorrow night?" Zhou Mingrui glanced at the flyers in the hands of others as he read their contents under his breath. With that thought, Zhou Mingrui went closer. Just as he was about to ask a clown with a red and yellow painted face, a hoarse woman's voice sounded from beside him. "Would you like to try a divination?" Zhou Mingrui subconsciously turned his head and saw a woman wearing a pointed hat and a long black dress standing in front of a short tent. Her face was smeared with red and yellow paint, and her eyes were a profound grayish blue. "No." Zhou Mingrui shook his head in response. He did not have the spare cash for divination. The woman laughed and said, "My tarot divination is very accurate." "Tarot?" Zhou Mingrui was instantly dumbfounded. This pronunciation was almost identical to the tarot cards on Earth, and tarot cards from Earth were a set of cards used for divination. They just had graphics that represented different omens. He suddenly recalled the origins of tarot divination in this world. It did not originate from the 7 Orthodox gods, nor was it an ancient legacy. Instead, it was created by the Intis Republic's consul of that era, Roselle Gusta, more than 170 years ago. This Mr. Roselle invented the steam engine, improved the sailing boat, overthrew the Intis kingdom's imperial rule, and was recognized by the god of craftsmanship. He also became the first consul of the Intis Republic. Later, he invaded other nations and placed Lemberg and other nations under his protection. He made the Lone Kingdom, Feine-Potter, Fizak Empire, and other powerful northern continent nations bow down to the Intis Republic. Following that, the Republic was then changed to an empire and he became the self-proclaimed Emperor Caesar. It was during Roselle's rule that the Church of Craftsmanship received its first public holy revelation since the 5th epoch. Ever since, the god of craftsmanship was changed to the god of steam and machinery. Roselle also invented tarot divination. He also established the contemporary system of paper-based cards and their play styles. There were many familiar styles that Zhou Mingrui was familiar with, such as Upgrade, Fighting the Landlord, Texas Poker, and Quint. In addition, the marine fleets he sent out discovered a sea route that led to the southern continent through the stormy and turbulent seas. This also began the era of colonialism. Unfortunately, he was betrayed in his old age. In the year 98 of the 5th epoch, he was assassinated by the combined forces of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, the former Intis royal family, the Sauron family, and other aristocrats. He eventually died in the White Maple Palace. To recall such general knowledge suddenly made him facepalm. With this in mind, Zhou Mingru was intrigued to see what tarot cards looked like. Therefore he nodded at the pointy-hat woman with the painted face and said, "If the, price is reasonable, I'll give it a try." The woman immediately said with a laugh, "Sir, you are the first one here today, so it's on the house."